You want a little sample of that?
Yeah.
You ready? Okay, here we go. 7 billion people on the planet, which means there are 7 billion different personality types, correct? Everybody's got their own thumbprint, right? But really, there are only 2 personality types, and we talked about this a little bit before, and I'm so glad you're interested because I'd love to share this with you. And so we're going to call them black bucket and white bucket. And as we know, everybody's gray, so everyone has a little of this and a little of that. So if I were to give you 17 characteristics of the black bucket person, you might say, well, I relate to 3 of those, but not the rest, so everybody's going to go through that. You'll fall on one side or the other. So let's go to extremes. The black bucket person is that literal one. So when, if you say to them, great job, they go, oh my gosh, thanks, right? That's the black bucket person. They're the feelers. So they're the ones who tend to be more affectionate, more physical. Okay, so that's the black bucket, literal feelers. White bucket is the opposite. They're the thinkers. So they're more analytical. They're the ones who process. The white bucket are the ones who stay here because they take information in through inference. Literal all I said was more on the right. I didn't say anything about the left. So over here, that's the black bucket. Over here, that's the white bucket. Now, some people moved a little. So it means they're probably closer to white, right? And so whatever that may be. So the thinker, the white bucket person is a thinker. They process, they take information in through inference. So whereas with the black bucket person who is the feeler, the literal, if you say to them, hey, great job, they say, gosh, thank you so much. If you say to the white bucket person, great job, they say, gosh, thank you so much. But in their head, they go, but I didn't need you to tell me that. I'll decide for myself. Thank you very much. All right. So that would be the white bucket person. In relationships, you got to have one of each for it to be like one that's going to go very well. What happens is black bucket people are shiny. They're more center stage, and eventually they want to beat each other up for center stage. So that won't work. White bucket people are processors, so they're going to go off into their own corners. That's not going to work. So you need a little bit of both. Now, each person has a different biggest fear. We all have all of them. But if the world were a perfect place, we'd all see that's the thing that I want. And so I'm going to go from here to there and get it. And it would be that simple if we were telling the truth. But what's really going on for kind of like all of the people is we're actually running from the thing we're afraid of. So we might say, I want to move into a new apartment. But the reality of it is, I really don't like my husband. So move into a new apartment might be the answer, but we can't know because it's too noisy, because you're pulling the bag of bricks of husband, you're pulling the 10 years of stories, you're pulling the lawyer, you're pulling the child support. Okay, so maybe you should get a new apartment, but we can't know that yet. And people act too soon when really they're reacting. So most of us, most of the time, are running from what we don't want, right? So let's look at what we don't want. The biggest fear of the black bucket person, the feeler, is rejection. That's me. I'm a black bucket person. The biggest fear is rejection. The biggest fear of the white bucket person is loss of control. Let's put this into real life. Black bucket person, fear of rejection, is having a bad day. You're all going to get this right. This is so easy. Fear of rejection person is having a bad day. What's one thing you can say to them to make them feel better? You're okay. Good job. You're the smartest. You're the fastest. You're the prettiest. You're so strong. Look, you're so tall. Look at you. Okay? All those things work every time. Okay. Now, with a white bucket person, if you say to them, good job, they're like, well, I'll decide for myself. If you say, I love you, they're like, those words mean nothing. Show me. Okay. So that's a white bucket person. So if somebody's biggest fear, this is where relationships go wrong right here. White bucket person is having a bad day. This is a loss of control person. What do we say to them to make them feel better?
Ideas to solve the problem.
We just got divorced. Here's why. You just took a person who feels out of control and you took control. Even if you say to them, oh, but it's okay, you'll feel better tomorrow. They're like, screw you, don't tell me how to feel, because we took control. We cannot solve their problems for them. Remember I said in the beginning, you have to ask a question to the inference people so they can make it mean something. So the thing we say to loss of control, fear of loss of control person is, ready for this? Write this down, say this to everyone all the time, and you win every time. This is the answer to everything. Ready? Here it goes. It's not your fault. Now, you remember the subconscious mind, which processes 40 million bits of information. So this happens this fast, okay? But the process that goes on when we say it's not your fault, they go, wait, if it wasn't my fault, it means it wasn't my job. And if it wasn't my job, it wasn't my responsibility, which means I didn't get it wrong. Oh my God, I'm okay. So let's back up and recap. Fear of rejection person, you're okay. Yay, I'm okay. Fear of loss of control person, it's not your fault. Yay, I'm okay. But if we say to them, you're okay, they say, don't you tell me how to feel. You see? And so that's where things go wrong. Now, these two are in a relationship, hopefully, because now it doesn't matter who's girl, boy, it doesn't matter. None of that matters, gender or whatever. But so let's just say she's black bucket and he's white bucket, just for our purposes, okay? So she's having a bad day. All she needs is for him to come home and say, I love you. And 5 minutes later, yes, I love you again. That's all, or maybe a little massagey to the shoulders. That's all she needs, is to know that she's okay, and she knows she's okay through touch and affection. He thinks, I'm going to be a great husband. Words don't mean anything. So that's stupid and shallow. I'm going to be the best person ever. I'm going to go wash the dishes. And you know what she says? Oh my God, we had a possible 10 minutes together and you spent it doing the dishes? You suck. And he's like, whoa, batshit, because what? Okay, and so that's what goes on, right? Now, let's say these two are in a fight. White bucket processor, thinker, goes in the bathroom to hide, to process. You know what black bucket's doing right now? Who's a black bucket? What are you doing? Because they've been left out to pasture. They've been rejected. So they're knocking on the door to talk about it. And the white bucket person's going, oh my God, you're attacking me. And the black bucket's going, oh my God, you're abandoning me. You see. So in my relationship, I finally found a white bucket after many, lots of dollars lost. When I'm having a bad day, like literally will pat me on the head and be like, You're awesome. People love you. And I'm like, oh my God, thanks. Right? And my partner thinks that that's ridiculous. And I know that too, but yet still, right? And so when my partner's having a bad day, all I want to do is help and fix it in love. And I've had to learn to back off and give like 3 days worth of space. And I have done this. And then my partner has come to me 3 days later and said, you are the best ever. Thank you for giving me exactly what I needed. And I'm like, that works. Right? Right? And so it goes, I'll give you one last example because I think you guys are really digging this, right? So the more extreme you are, the more extreme your partner. So my partner and I are pretty close to the middle, actually. We kind of can flip-flop either way. But so I have this extreme black bucket client who one of the things she wanted to accomplish was cleaning the house, getting more organized. And she's got a 6-month-old. So that's like, right, crazy stuff. And it was a few weeks we'd worked together and she was so happy. So she reports back to me. She said, I couldn't wait to tell you this. She said, I've got my things in my ears and I'm listening to this podcast and I'm enjoying it because she just found new ways of being in the house. And she's like, sometimes I put on music and dance. Next thing I know, I'm cleaning and I'm losing weight while I'm doing it. So she was thrilled with the work we were doing because you just get inspired and you forget to think about that you clean the entire kitchen, which is what happened. So she said, so here I was, I cleaned the entire kitchen. I didn't even realize I was doing it. This stuff works. She said, I'm done. I did the whole kitchen. Don't remember if I've ever done that in my life. Now, because she's an extreme black bucket, without meeting her husband, I know he's an extreme control guy, which means he kind of like won't say a lot of stuff. And he thinks everybody else knows what he's thinking, right? So he's the quiet one. She's the out front loud one. That's usually the way it goes. So she says, I cleaned the whole kitchen, was so happy doing it, listening to my stuff. And I sit down in the living room. Now I hear my husband come home and he goes through the kitchen. And now he walks into the living room where I'm sitting and he literally, this is a true story. She said he had tears in his eyes and she didn't know what happened. And she said, oh my God, what? And he said, thank you so much. In all of the years we've been together, this is the first time I feel like you really knew what would make me so happy, and you went out of your way to clean the kitchen, so I would come home and find it, and that was the sweetest. She said, Sandy, I was dying inside because that was the example you used of washing the dishes, and I thought that was crazy. I said, did you think of your husband when you were cleaning the kitchen? She's like, never! I said, did you tell him? And she said, oh, hell no! And so he really made the inference that that was for him. And she said, I thought you were just giving this crazy extreme example. She said, now I've learned what he needs. And even though I'll always think it's ridiculous, I'll still do it. And now I've learned how to communicate my needs to him and make sure, and this is where the communication comes in. If you're someone who needs to hear I love you, your partner might think that's ridiculous. And so you can say that to them. Say, I know our brains work differently, and I'll never make it your fault by saying you're not doing enough for me. I'll just keep saying, hey, this is how I'm feeling, and this is what I need. And you can provide it or not provide it, but we never make it their fault that they didn't treat us right, because they're never going to think the way we do. And so we start to learn how to ask and how to not make it their responsibility, because they're not our source, if that makes sense. So that's sort of everything we need to know about relationships, communication, and personalities. How'd we do?
So you're be like, screw you, I gave birth to your children, and I did all this, and you're happy because I washed the damn dishes.
That was the last 20 years of my life. and then you got to get it out. That's like the first pancake. You've got to burn it, and then now we can talk about being a better cook. Anybody not yet find themselves or their current or past relationships or parental relationships in here?
Yeah.
Typically, not always, my family's different, way different, but typically the kids take on, let me get this right, dad's personality. Typically. And the reason for that is this. Generally speaking, mom is the original caretaker, so kid and mom are together. And then kid needs to find independence, so kid goes away from mom and hangs out with dad and sees how dad survives mom. So kid becomes opposite personality of mom. That's not always the case. I was a single mom when I started, and my son took on, so my son is also a rejection person. So my son and I are both black bucket, but he's a bigger, shinier black bucket. So when I'm with him, I take on more of the role of white bucket, and it balances. And it's also been good for me in my growth, because I was too much of that too. So you'll find that you do shuffleboard each other. And if you get two black bucket people, one of them is going to get shuffleboarded into white bucket. And so you can start to look for some of those things. And it's fine. But just know, if you start dating someone who is in the same bucket as you, eventually, it won't last. Won't last.